Says the injured will be taken to hospitals in Russia, but didn't specify where the other soldiers will be held. However, Kyiv says there has not been a surrender. Instead, it's an evacuation. President Zelensky says he'll work to get his boys home and says Ukraine needs to keep its heroes alive. With the fight in Azovstal close to the end, Russia now controls huge swathes of Ukraine's coastline. The fall of Mariupol, if confirmed, will give Moscow a secure land bridge to Crimea and frees up troops to attack other positions. However, the fight to extend this land bridge past Odessa towards the Russian-backed territory of Transnistria in Moldova is proving difficult for the Russian army. For more analysis on this, let's speak to our correspondent, Sasha Vakalina. Sasha, great to have you with us. 265 Ukrainian soldiers reported to have evacuated from the besieged steel plant in Mariupol today. But the picture is still very unclear, isn't it? What's going on exactly?
It is indeed very unclear, and let's look at it from 3 points of view here. For the first thing we heard last night was actually the statement and the address by Azov, where they said that the entire Mariupol garrison was following orders to save lives. This was the statement by Azov itself. Then we heard from Ukrainian authorities, and this is when we heard about the evacuation. The idea of the evacuation was exactly as you said, as Zelensky said, to save the lives. And then we also heard that it was about the Azov performing their combat task, and the main goal now was to save their lives. What was that task? And that task was, in fact, buying some time for the rest of Ukraine to battle Russian forces and secure Western arms needed to withstand this invasion. And this is also how they managed to keep Russian forces there, not let them go further into Donbass, Donetsk region, and Zaporizhia region as well. Ukrainian authorities also said that what's going to follow this evacuation will be a swap. Well, there will be between Russia and Ukraine, and this had been agreed, according to Kyiv. Russia said last night, at first, hours before the evacuation, they had reached an agreement to remove the wounded soldiers, calling it a humanitarian corridor. But then this afternoon, this statement has changed. As you said, they said that this is now a surrender. And in fact, it's also some of the Russian officials said that they could be tried or even executed as all fighters. MPs in Russia's State Duma said that they would propose new laws that would derail prisoner exchange for fighters who Moscow claims are terrorists, and they might now actually recognize them as terrorists. This is a completely different statement from Moscow compared to the one that we've heard yesterday. Also, we heard from Kyiv today that Ukrainian authorities do know how many more Ukrainian defenders are still in Mariupol. Not all of them were evacuated, not all of them were taken to the Russia-controlled territories, but they're not going to reveal how many of them are still in Azovstal, how many of them are still in Mariupol, because this is an ongoing situation and an operation that is being performed in different stages. It started yesterday, it's still on today, and Kyiv is not revealing the details on how long that will last.
If Russia does get control of Mariupol, full control, and of course the coastline around that part of Ukraine, how significant is that in terms of the wider conflict?
It is significant for Russia to be able to present that as the biggest city that Russian forces managed to take over ever since the war started on the 24th of February. Mariupol, before the war, that is a big city. This is 500,000 people. Of course, it is a completely different picture there now. More than 90% of Mariupol is absolutely destroyed. There are still civilians who stayed there, but these are the civilians that for weeks and months did not receive any humanitarian aid, because, mind you, the humanitarian corridors did not work for Mariupol, which means not only about the evacuation of the civilians, but also about delivering them things like food, water, medical supplies. People there stayed without all of that, without the heating, without water, in the really very complicated conditions, and they are still there. Yes, indeed, for Russia that would be the opportunity to say that ever since the invasion, they did manage to get over, to take Mariupol over as the only, for the moment, big city that they would manage to do so. And yet again, we still don't know how many Ukrainian defenders are there. But in fact, we're talking about the place that hardly existed, with more than 20,000 civilians who were killed and who died in Mariupol.
Indeed, Sasha. Thank you so much for that analysis. For more on this situation, let's bring in our Russia correspondent, Galina Polonskaya. Galina, good to see you. We've just heard that from Sasha that Russia's State Duma is considering a ban on exchanging any soldiers from the Azovstal steel plant. What more can you tell us?
Hello, Paul. Well, Russia says that its investigative committee will interrogate the soldiers from the Azovstal steel plant. And indeed, the Speaker of Russia's lower house of parliament, Vyacheslav Volodin, today ordered the lawmakers to draft a standing order prohibiting the exchange of those soldiers on Russian prisoners of war. He said that those Ukrainian soldiers were not prisoners but criminals of war, and that Russia had to do everything to bring them to justice. And there were much more worrying comments from the State Duma. Paul, Leonid Slutsky, who is to become the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party, actually urged that Russia should consider an exception in its moratorium on death penalty for those soldiers. The Kremlin was asked about this, but Vladimir Putin's spokesman said that it was not for them to comment, but for the defense ministry. And Amnesty International urged to observe the rights of Ukrainian soldiers from the Azovstal steel plant. In a statement, it said that they were dehumanized by Russian state propaganda and that their fate was very worrisome. There were very, very big concerns over their fate as prisoners of war.
I'd like to talk to you about what happened on one of Russia's top talk shows on Monday night. A retired colonel said things would only get worse for Russia in Ukraine. Are we seeing the emergence of dissent within Russia?
It was very surprising to hear this retired colonel saying those things, Paul, frankly speaking, because this ex-colonel, he used to say on the 15th of February, for example, that Russian armed forces were very strong and had many surprises for the enemy. Now, in the middle of this most watched, let's say, pro-Kremlin talk show, he says he actually urges to stop taking informational tranquilizers, swallowing them. He says that Russia is in complete geopolitical isolation. And when the anchor tries to object, he says, no, when there are 40 countries in one bloc united against Russia, it means that Russia is limited in its military geopolitical capabilities, and India and China would not help because they are not unconditional friends for Russia. And after, he says even more, he says that Ukraine is ready to mobilize 1 million well-prepared men, and that the situation would even get worse for Russia. So this was just one voice, but very, very unusual, and I'm pretty sure that it was well heard across all the time zones in Russia.
OK, Galina, many thanks for that analysis. Thank you. In the south, the Ukrainian army are battling hard against Russian forces aiming to push westward. Let's bring in our international correspondent, Annalise Borges, who's in the front-line city of Mykolaiv for us. Annalise, great to see you. You've been close to the front line today. Tell us what you saw and what you heard.
Well, we got to witness the intensity of the battle for Kherson, a fight that is being fought village by village and destroying virtually everything along its way. We got to see civilian infrastructure completely destroyed. We entered a school that was shelled earlier in the conflict. We also saw dozens of homes completely damaged by the fighting, and we got to meet civilians, people stuck in those villages, now completely dependent on exterior help to survive. And also, we got to speak to those risking their lives to provide that lifeline.
Yes, we give them aid often. We were here yesterday, on the 4th of May, on the 16th, to all families, yes. When we have some products, we give it to them immediately, pasta and sandwiches. We will show you right now.
Without this, we would eat what we grow in our houses, potatoes, pickles. All the shops are closed. We can't even buy bread. Thank God that they give something to us.
The fact is that they believe in Ukraine, and they stand together. If they leave the village, things will be much more difficult.
And Annalise, how are Ukraine's war efforts going on in the south? Are troops making ground like they are in other parts of the country?
Well, it's difficult to say, Paul, because officials here in the south are not communicating the same kinds of gains we're hearing from the northern and eastern fronts across Ukraine. But we do understand that they are able to stand ground. At least that is the line, the official line of communication. But we also know that things are not easy for these troops over here. We attempted to get to the line of contact earlier today and we were turned around. Soldiers simply could not deal with us. They were under heavy bombardment. Ukrainian soldiers told us that Russians are using everything in their disposal. They're using tanks, artillery, rifles, but also cluster bombs, which are, of course, banned under international law. We also know that these officials, Ukrainian troops, but also Ukrainian officials have been adamant that the Russian side keeps aiming very far away from the line of contact, from the front line, and trying to destroy civilian infrastructure, like, for example, this power station that they targeted just a couple of days ago. And as you can see, they missed it by just a few meters, hitting this spot instead.